This is Damian Macy, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library and working on our oral history project. This evening I'm with Jim White, and this evening is August the 20th of 2015, and I'm visiting with Jim here in his lovely home on North 6th Street. And Jim grew up in Marshall, has a lot of early memories, I know, of the community, and an interesting career with the city and other places. So with that, I'll introduce you to Jim.
All right, thank you, Damon. I guess starting out with some of the first questions here, I was actually born in Paris, Illinois. My parents were Robert and Mildred White. At that time we lived in the West Union area, close to Melrose actually. And my folks were farmers. Mom, of course, did the typical farm thing with raising chickens and taking care of the garden and one thing and another. And Dad had tons of livestock. So that's pretty much how I grew up. When I started school, actually I was supposed to start school at the Ohio School, which is near Ohio Chapel, down near West Union. But before I remember my mom took me there to visit that school in the spring, and she said, now this is where you'll go to school next fall. Well, lo and behold, it came time to go to school. They said, no, you need to go to Walnut Prairie. They were closing down the Ohio School. That's back just a little bit prior to consolidation. Well, I went to Walnut Prairie to school for about a week or 10 days. And they said, no, you need to go to Marshall. So I hopped on a different bus and went to Marshall every day thereafter to school. So
well, yeah. About what year was that?
Oh, that would have been 56, 55,
okay,
56.
After they really started the major consolidation.
Yes. A little consolidation story. My dad, of course, he owned farm ground and farmed in different places. And during consolidation, that was a pretty heated discussion. And my dad had friends and neighbors that were on both sides of the fence, so to speak. Some were in Hudsonville School District, some were in Martinsville, and some were in Marshall. And my dad, finally, he decided that I would go to Marshall. And in doing so, he had an 80-acre field where we lived, and he cut that in half. 40 acres stayed with Hudsonville School District, 40 acres stayed with Marshall School District. And that's how that all ended up. So,
did he have any conflicts with, I guess,
no,
powers that be doing that?
He pleased everybody. I mean, it was interesting. Of course, I've heard the story. I could have cared less at that age. But Dad said, because I always wondered why that 80 acres, 40 was, Hudsonville, 40 was in Marshall. He said, well, here's why. So,
as a youngster, I'm sure you had some chores around home to do, didn't you?
Chores? Oh my, yes. Yeah. Every farm boy had chores back then. I mean, you would have a certain, of course, being in 4-H, you had your own livestock. And then, of course, Mom and Dad were usually in the field or working, obviously. So it was up to me as a young boy to, when I got home from school, or even before that, I'd had to gather the eggs and make sure that the cows had feed ready to be milked and water and all those things, preparation for when Mom and Dad got home, and then Dad would milk. He'd milk twice a day, kept about probably 15, 20 head of, at the time they called it B milk. A milk was, I forget now, it was cooled and managed, and then it went to a certain dairy. And B milk was a little less valuable. You just put it in, I think they were 20-gallon milk cans, if I remember right. And you just put the milk can in a big container of water, big old water tank, and that's how you cooled it until the truck come to pick it up.
Was that trucked into the Kraft plant here in
It
Marshall?
was, yep.
And so most of that all ended up as cheese. I think.
Yes. In fact, my dad drove a milk truck for Kraft, and my mom worked in the cheese plant.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I remember that's some wonderful cheese. Dad knew someone out there, and he'd go in and they would, well, here, try a little piece
just
of this.
cut off a little
Sample.
chunk. Sure.
Wonderful.
It really was. Yeah.
How about pets and all? Did you latch on to a
Oh, sure.
particular animal somewhere along the way?
Oh, yeah. Every boy has a dog, you know. Mine was a Cocker Spaniel.
Oh, my.
And anybody that came on the place had to go through him first. I could do anything with that dog. Of course, you've heard the story time and time again about boys and their pets and dogs, but my folks, myself, we could do anything with that dog we wanted. But if a stranger came up, business was picking up, you know. And he would bite them. I mean, he would put them back in the truck till Dad would get a hold of the dog then, and then he'd send him to the barn. But yeah.
In gathering those eggs, did you ever scramble them, any of them, before their time?
Oh yeah, dropped many of them. Funny story about that. One night, fall of the year, of course it's getting dark earlier. My parents were not home. I had waited. I'd been fooling around like a boy will, so I didn't go gather the eggs as soon as I got home. Well, short story, it was dark. And I went to the chicken house, and of course at that point, the hens had already sat on the nest. So I had to pull every hen off and get the eggs. And I pulled this one hen off.
She wasn't happy either.
No, she wasn't happy. Pulled this one hen off and stuck my hand in there to get the eggs, and something moved. And I thought, what on earth? It was a big old black snake was in that nest. It was the last time I gathered eggs after dark. Yeah.
At least it wasn't some old rattler or something.
Yeah, oh, really? Yeah.
In those chores on your farm, did you have some horses at all or not?
We did. I had an old, they call it a sorrel, as they called it, sorrel colored mare, and my dad he still had an old horse around. He didn't really farm with horses, but he told me I needed to learn how to farm with horses. So somewhere he found an old set of harness and an old plow, and it was my job to plow the garden with my old mare. Well, she knew a lot more about it than I did. She had done that before. I mean, it was comical. It was comical. I remember my dad and brother were just standing back laughing, uncontrollable. But we finally got it kind of scratched over. It wasn't plowed the way Dad would have done it, but
That's part of some of those early memories.
oh, sure. Yeah.
How about for hobbies? Did you have any hobbies at that time, or maybe even something that might bring up to date?
Oh gosh. I suppose my biggest hobby, I always loved to tear into things and see how they worked. Motors and bicycles and old lawnmowers and things like that. And
Like the mechanical side.
yeah. And that carried on, well, I guess through today even. I still enjoy seeing how something works or trying to make it work again, you know. But yeah, the farm background, the mechanical background, learning to do things yourself pretty much got me started on a career with Marathon Oil. So,
When you took them apart, did they all go back together, right?
Eventually. Yeah, it might take a time
Those
or two.
spare parts, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, my dad about had a cow. I had saved up hay baling money, and I was 14, I think. I had $75 saved up.
Wow.
Now, that was a summer's work.
It was.
And I forget the guy's name. His last name was Livix. Had a junkyard in West Union. Bernard Livix was his name. And he'd have junk cars and this and that and the other, but he'd also occasionally have something that ran or would run. Well, I bought a 1947 Ford two-door sedan off of him that I had to pull home. So I got my brother to help me pull it home. Hadn't even told Dad.
Oh,
That didn't go over well either, but I did keep the old car. He said, well, if you're going to have the car, you're the one that's going to have to make it run. So between me and an old neighbor, George Marvin,
yeah.
he had worked on old vehicles all his life too. And between his guidance and my determination, we got it running.
What year was this? I know you said it was a 47 Ford, but what year were you working on it?
Oh, well, like I said, I was about 14 or 15. So that would have been, gee whiz, 60,
Okay.
somewhere along in there, 1960, 61.
So the car wasn't really ancient, but it had
No.
a few years on it.
Yeah, it wasn't actually in bad shape, but somebody backed into it with a truck. The right front fender was just annihilated. So with sledgehammers and pry bars, I got it out where I could drive it anyhow.
So was the motor and everything working, but it was body work that was the
Yeah,
problem?
well, it was, I had to get it going. Needed the valves ground.
Oh, okay.
It had a flathead V8 in it, and I didn't know top from bottom. But Mr. Marvin helped me through that, showed me how to grind the valves and fix it up. Yeah, I got it running, and then Dad said, you don't need to be driving that. The front end was all loose and worn out.
How long did you keep it?
Oh, probably a year and a half.
Really?
And then I traded it to another neighbor. He had a 1949 Ford half-ton pickup, and I traded it to him for that old pickup. And it ran and stayed on the road pretty decent, but it didn't have any compression. You couldn't crank it fast enough with the batteries, but you could push it 6 or 8 feet and let out on the clutch and start right up. Run all day, but it just wouldn't start itself. So,
You had to get a little encouragement then.
yeah, for sure.
So that was the start of your auto and truck ownership, I guess.
Yes, it was. And then that kind of prepped me for, I was pretty fortunate during school and in the service. I was fairly mechanically inclined. I could figure some of that stuff out pretty easily, So.
Did you have a favorite subject in school?
Well, I suppose so, and it was industrial arts at that time, which was woodworking and metalworking and welding and a little bit of electrical and of course ag class with Truman Spitler. He was my ag teacher. And Mr. Gene Arnold Bowen was the industrial arts teacher. Yeah, that was probably my favorite classes.
Do you have some shelves or chair or anything that you made back then, still have it?
It's in the family, but I don't have it. Yeah. And it was a shelf, and then it was like a 3-dimensional drawing of a horse's head, but it was hammered out of a piece of copper.
Oh, neat.
Copper plate or whatever, a little thicker than a piece of paper, and you kind of drew on it, and then you hammered it out to make it 3-dimensional.
Is that plywood?
Yeah, mounted on plywood and put little brass nails all the way around it to hold it.
You had a real trophy to bring home then.
Yes, yeah. I actually got a good grade on that one too.
Is there a subject that you really didn't like?
Yeah, I just struggled with math. I really did.
A lot of people do.
And also in high school, you had to take, you're supposed to take, which I took algebra, never did very well at that, and then I had to have a class in, what the heck was it? It was the next step after algebra. I want to say calculus, but that's not.
Calculus or trigonometry or?
Trig. I was lost. and it never got any better. But I had pretty good grades, obviously, in spelling and English and literature, and took a Spanish class. So I think Mr. Harrington decided maybe I could go ahead and graduate.
Did you have a favorite teacher?
They were all really good, but probably just due to the ag background, probably Mr. Spittler. Yeah. And Mr. Bowen. They were...
Was there a teacher or maybe someone else that you consider a big influence that probably started you out on the right track?
Oh, either one of those guys, really. Every teacher I had was a good teacher. And I enjoyed every class, really, but math just escaped me. Now, basic math, I could set with the best of them. But when you got to A equal B squared times 2, it made no sense whatsoever. And to this day, it doesn't make any sense.
That's, I think, true of a lot of us.
Yeah. That was my downfall, math. Did pretty well in everything else, so.
And so what year did you graduate from high school?
65. Graduated in 65. All my school years, after that little bit of school changing early on in the first grade, and then I was in Marshall all the time after that. So I always felt like I belonged in Marshall, you know.
So now, as being I'll say a country boy, and in a city school, did you ever feel a conflict there that you were different or anything?
No, probably not. I mean, the country boys, farm boys, seemed like they always had a little dab of money in their pocket. Maybe just $1, but that would buy you 4 or 5 gallons of gas, or a hamburger and a Coke or whatever. And farm boy could always come up with something to drive if you needed to take folks someplace. So I think back then that was just not a bad deal, you know.
I think it's small town too. You're more,
sure.
Well, everyone's kind of in the same boat.
Sure.
People know each other. They know families, even though they may live in the long way away.
Yeah, you knew everyone, and you knew their parents, and their parents darn sure knew you. I learned that out. I learned that early too.
That was the reason to keep the nose clean.
Really.
So in school, did you have a plan or a thought that when I graduate, I'm going to do a X, Y, or Z?
No, and I've always regretted the fact that I didn't dig deeper when I was in school, because at that time there wasn't really a I forget what the term is now, but someone that helps you set your career for
kind of a guidance counselor.
Yeah, a guidance counselor. I don't remember anyone like that, but it was always recommended to go to teachers college. There was a shortage of teachers, and that's where you needed to head, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. That just didn't interest me at all.
Didn't gel.
No, not at all. So therefore I thought, well, school's not offering me much. So when I graduated, actually before I graduated, I enlisted in the Air Force. You could do that. In fact, of course, that was during the Vietnam era.
Yeah.
And you could enlist based on your graduation date. So you could enlist any time your senior year. And then that went as good time, you might say, for your career years, whatever. So I actually enlisted in, I think it was December of 64, graduated spring of 65, and at that particular time you were on standby. As soon as you graduated, you were on standby. They called it something else. But then I actually didn't get sent up until September of '65. So I spent the summer, but you never knew when you were going to get that call. See? So that summer, when I wasn't working on the farm, I worked a night shift at TRW.
Oh.
And they were making some sort of transistors. And I knew I did not want to do that all the rest of my life either.
So you were actually on the production line somewhere?
Yes. Yeah. And there were 3 guys on the night shift and probably 75 ladies. Oh my goodness.
Not the environment you wanted either, huh?
That was an experience. That was an experience.
Did I guess with that many with that many women, and obviously a production guideline and a schedule and the commitment to make so much and a quota of things, did the women associate with the men? Because I've heard
A little bit.
Sometimes they can be very.
Oh yeah. I mean, they were. I don't know what the word would be, but you stayed on your line and they stayed on their line. But if something broke on their line, they sure did like for you to come over and fix it. But it was a quota system, and they were very protective of what they did and made sure they had all their material, and so they could, make their quota of a night.
Have you kept up to date or been in the TRW plant?
Yes, they had an open house a few years ago. It's just totally different. I mean,
it's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And I think the average person on the street has no idea how technically involved and how sophisticated that is.
The building on the outside looks similar to what it was, but after that, there's nothing similar about it.
So, he went into the military, and what happened then? Where were you?
Well, everybody in the Air Force goes to Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas, which I did. My basic training, oh golly, it was extended, and I realize now they were putting me through some other classes, but it was extended. I spent 4 months down there, and then at that point they sent you somewhere to a technical school to fine-tune you a little bit. Well, at that time they had what they called the dream sheet, and you had a choice where you wanted to transfer to.
That usually doesn't happen in the military either.
But in the Air Force at that particular time they did. Well, everyone was getting sent to Vietnam. I mean, virtually everybody, probably 80% of the guys. They were either in Nam or they were supporting Nam at some of the off islands or whatnot. But anyhow, being young and dumb, and as I was at that time, I put Vietnam down as my first choice. And my last choice, you had 3 choices, was Rantoul, Illinois, because I knew I was never going to head back to Illinois for a long time. Guess what? I got sent to Rantoul, Illinois for tech training and spent the better part of 3 years right there as a trainer.
Wow, 3 years.
And they say, well, you never get your choice anyhow, So just put something wild in there. Well, I did. And
what was that?
It was not reverse psychology because I'm not that smart. Yeah. So there what they sent me there for was pneumatics training, because in a lot of the older aircraft they still use hydraulics and pneumatics, which is air actuators and one thing and another. But I failed the colorblind test. And of course, when you get into the pneumatics and the hydraulics, everything was color coded, and all the valving and switches and wiring was all color coded. And boy, I thought, oh Lord, what are they going to do with me now? I really am going to go to Nam.
Were you aware of any color blindness before that?
No, none whatsoever.
Wow.
Now I can see my basic colors fine, but when you start mixing, breaking them down,
those wires and everything are little too.
yes, like a telephone cable, you know, there's hundreds of colors in there. No, that didn't work. So I'm at Rantoul at this time when I found that out, and then I had to go see the well, it was the captain, I guess, then, and he was going to tell me what he was going to do with me. There were two of us actually out of 100. It was a flight, what they called a flight. That was the group of men that they sent. And no matter where you went from Lackland, they sent you in hundreds. But there might be 50 go to California, maybe 20 go here. So when you all converged, you still had 100 people. That was just something, you know, that's what they called a flight. So there was 100 of us up there from different places. And the captain, I remember, asked me, he said, well, son, what can you do? I said, well, sir, I can do most anything. If it's broken, I can probably fix it or know what it takes to fix it. He said, we need welders. Have you ever welded? And I said, no, sir, I haven't. But I've used a cutting torch a lot. He said, good, you're a welder. So, so
Sounds like the military.
Yeah, so I spent 6 months in welding school. And I had a 35-cent title. I was a metallurgy specialist. And at that time, of course, all of the aircraft and choppers and everything in Nam and different places were getting torn up and shot down and one thing and another. So I figured I'd really set myself up now. Well, when it came time that school was ending, everybody wondered where they was going. Well, they did. They all got shipped everywhere. Probably 20% of them got sent to Nam or overseas someplace. And when I got my report and record, it didn't say anything. Should see the captain. Thought, oh boy, now. Because we'd had a couple run-ins, but just minor stuff, you know. And I thought, oh my gosh. But anyhow, he offered me the chance to stay in Rantoul and be a trainer. So that's how I finished my service. Training other guys to weld and basic training stuff and things like that. So that was my military career right there.
That's not really very far up the road either from home and family.
Yep. I actually, after about 6 months,
excuse me,
I was able to take my car back, and then weekends or sometime I could just come home if I needed to. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed that too. I mean, it was, you might say, a good job.
That's rare. And to be that close to home. And
oh,
really
that's just absolutely unheard of.
Yeah.
Just unheard of.
Did you ever think along that way that you might want to make the Air Force your career?
No. I was tired of it. And then it didn't take long, and I looked back and I thought, you know what, I could have stayed right there and been retired at about the age of 40, you know.
Well, they did have a 20-year.
Yes.
I don't know if they do anymore or not, but 20-year commitment and you can retire.
Yep.
A lot of benefits.
A lot of them. So those are just one or two of the mistakes I've made. But you never know. That's all history. You know.
So you got out of the military then?
Mm-hmm.
Did you come back to Marshall?
Yep. Came right back to Marshall and worked on the farm. And just kind of did what young farm boys do. Go to town on Saturday night and go to work Sunday morning, you know. That was about it. It wasn't very exciting, but I liked it, you know. So.
What were some of your early memories of Marshall? What you did, where you went, where you shopped?
Oh, gee whiz. Obviously, I'm sure the top three of people you've talked to before was number one, the dog and suds. Possibly number one would have been the candy cushion and the tasty freeze. I mean, just I've burned thousands of gallons of gasoline just driving around all three of those places. But that was place to be.
And the thing to do?
Back in the 60s and early 70s, yeah. That was about what there was to do. If there wasn't a football or a basketball game, that was it. And then everybody converged at those places even after a school function. So
And at that time, the theater had already burned.
yes,
too.
yes. I can remember that going to that theater not very many times. I was pretty young. I think that burned in mid-50s.
I think 57. I think.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Somewhere about then.
But that was quite a place. I mean, as a kid, I remember you'd go in there and boy, just people everywhere, and you could get a cold soda and popcorn. You know, that was pretty rare.
I remember going as a youngster. It was 9 cents admission.
Really?
You mentioned you're traveling around and the number of miles you covered. Do you recall what the price per gallon of gas was then?
Oh gosh, in the 60s, couldn't have been more than a quarter, if that.
I can't recall, but that's about right, I think.
Yeah, 22, 23 cents, something like that.
You could say put in $1 worth and you got some
Right,
gas.
you could, if you had $1, you could ride around for
For a
several
while.
hours on $1, you know.
Do you recall what kind of car you had at that time?
Yeah, I was driving my dad's car, actually. It was a 62 Chevy Impala. Nice car. Yeah. And then when I graduated back from high school, of course I'd been wanting a car, a better car. And my mom and dad had already planned it. But my graduation present was $500 down payment for a new car if I wanted it, and pay my insurance for 6 months. Fenton Quinn had the insurance. And so anyhow, I ordered it was a 65 Chevy Impala.
Okay.
And then that actually came in after I'd left for the service. And Dad picked it up, I remember, and put it in a shed for me. And my military pay just did make my car payment. So.
And you probably got that from, was it Simpson at that time?
Yeah.
Or Geckler?
Yeah, Doc Simpson.
Doc Simpson.
Sure was. Geckler worked there actually as a salesman.
And then he acquired it
Ralph,
later.
yeah. And then he became part owner and then eventually owned the whole thing.
Let's see, did they they have GMC trucks?
Yes.
I know they had Buick and
They had
Chevrolet.
Chevy, Buick, and GMC. Sold a lot more Chevys and GMCs. And I think the GMC was just a little bit more expensive. I remember reading, of course now I still like to research some of those old trucks, but GMC always touted the fact that their wheel bearings were a little bit bigger and their brakes were a little bit thicker.
Just a little.
And yeah, just a tad. But as far as I know yet to this day, Chevy GMC parts just traded. If you went to Napa today and ordered a starter for a GMC, it'd be the same one that goes on a Chevrolet.
I guess I can remember though back at those times, boy, when the new cars came out and were announced about September, October.
Oh, big deal.
It was an enormous event.
Yes.
People came to the showroom and you could very easily tell the new model from the last year.
Oh, absolutely. There was no question. And they'd always have hot dogs and popcorn and cold drinks and stuff. I mean, they turned it into a party. And they would, in fact, I was just telling my son-in-law, we were walking past Mr. Hogan's place there on Main Street, which used to be the old Pontiac dealership.
Yeah.
Now, I don't remember who originally made that, the dealership, but I think I think it was Flowers.
Bob Flowers, I think.
Yeah. But anyhow, I remember that they would get their cars in, they would be covered, and they would immediately take them and put them on an elevator and put them upstairs. And boy, you weren't allowed to even go peek. And then on show day, whenever that was, they'd bring them all down and show them off. Park them on the sidewalk area on Main Street. I remember that well. That was just a big deal.
It might have even been before that, but do you remember how many car dealers there were in Marshall?
Oh gosh, were there 5? I remember Chevy, Ford. We had Chevy, Ford, Pontiac.
Percy Stanfield had the Studebaker.
Sure.
There was a Prevost, Chrysler, Plymouth. And then at one time there was a Hudson dealer.
Hudson dealership.
That feller's on the
where
west
Doc
side.
Mitchell used to be.
Somewhere close along there.
Yeah, on the west side of the courthouse. And I think a Literal. I don't know if he owned it or not, but he worked there, I remember.
Hope Literal later had it was a used car dealership.
Yes.
But I don't recall if he had a new car franchise.
Like I say, he probably just worked there. Or maybe would just happen to be there. But I remember going there with my dad. Shopping for a new car with my dad was, oh my gosh. You had to have the patience of Job. And you knew he was going to end up with a Chevrolet. But he'd go to every dealership and get the best deal and take his trade in. And I never really knew what the best deal was, but we always ended up with the Chevrolet.
Were they at that time, and I'm sure they were putting out brochures and folders and all too that you could take home with you. Did he take those home and discuss?
Oh, absolutely. They would be on the kitchen table, just spreading over the entire table. And I can remember my mom would say, "Robert, put that stuff up. We can't afford a new car right now."
Sounds like Mom.
Yep.
So did he do the same thing with farm equipment if he was wanting a new piece of equipment?
Yes. He'd go to John Deere and Case and Alice Chalmers and come home with an International. That's just how it was. Yep.
So did you think you might end up and stay in farming?
I never really thought much about it, but inevitably I was going to be. I was going to become a farmer. And did when my folks obviously got to the age they couldn't do it anymore. My brother and I farmed together for several years. And then there were some really tough times hit. What would that have been in the 80s, early 80s? And we ended up selling down probably half of the farm because we had too much debt. It was that simple, But yeah, we was able to keep at least half of it, maybe a little bit more, and then found different ways to earn money. Had a little trucking business and things like that. Hauled grain, livestock.
Yeah. And that was with your brother, Bob, too, right?
Yeah. It was White Brothers Trucking.
Did you, were you two the only ones driving, or did you have some drivers or hired people?
No, we actually, well, we started out, we each had our own truck, if you will. And then we just kept adding equipment.
Okay.
And we, at our peak, we probably had half a dozen pieces each, semis and 10-wheelers and equipment like that. Lime trucks. That was pretty popular back then.
Oh, yeah.
You could make good money hauling limestone if you didn't mind the work but a lime truck was just a lot of maintenance, a lot of things to wear out on them.
A lot of mechanical
chains and gearboxes and one thing and another. Yeah.
Well, somewhere along the way, you must have met a young lady that kind of struck your fancy too.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Carol Elaine Davison.
Carol. Okay, I didn't realize her name was Carol.
She goes by the name Elaine, if you call her Carol, she may or may not look because she's so accustomed to not being called that. But yeah, she was a daughter of Paul Allen and Carol Davison. PA, they called him.
And
They actually lived at 51 Archer. The last house
okay.
the last house in the city limits.
Okay.
Going out to West Archer.
So was she in school when you were?
No, she's younger. She's 7 years younger than I am. But
So, where and how did you happen to meet them?
Actually, the first time we met, she was working at the dime store. She worked there evenings and weekends.
Caldwell's.
Yep. Old Mr. Caldwell, the dad, nicest guy ever. Gee whiz. Well, anyhow, she worked there evenings and weekends after school and whatnot. And of course, the dime store was like Walmart. You went there for almost everything, you know. And I went in for something and met her. And Mr. Caldwell he'd give the schoolgirls a chance to work there, you know, if they wanted to.
Great.
So, but yeah, that's where we met and dated for probably a year and a half, maybe a little longer.
You kept finding reasons to go shop, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what year were you married in?
Oh, Jiminy. That would have been gee whiz, 45 years ago? 46 years ago. 46 years ago. It was April 11th. I remember the date, and I'm struggling with the year now. 70. That's awful. See, I blew it in math. Still there.
Were you married in Marshall or?
We were, yeah. We was married at the Methodist Church.
Okay.
And then had a reception at PA and Carol's house. And I probably had 2 nickels to rub together, but I'd had to search for them. But I had an aunt, Dorothy Gard. Jim Gard was her husband. Well, anyhow, he had passed away fairly young in life. And my Aunt Dorothy, which I'd heard, other than being in the service, I'd never been out of Clark County, so to speak. But anyhow, she set me up and got me reservations for our honeymoon. And she would frequent French Lick, Indiana, back then. And so she got me reservations and got me set up. And the room was an unheard of price. It was almost $50. That was big bucks for a room back then.
Was that in the French Lick Hotel or at the West Baden?
Actually, no, it was the other one. It was actually a Hilton at that time.
Yeah, okay.
That's what it was. But that's where we went for our honeymoon. And there wasn't much in French Lick back then. It was kind of on the decline at that point.
Have you been back there?
Oh yeah, we go every year. We go every year.
That's wonderful.
For our honeymoon, yeah, revival, for our anniversary.
That place is really,
oh my, it's
really
gorgeous.
changed in the last 10 years.
Yes, it's gorgeous. And every year they just add a little more, a little more, a little more. So that's my phone and a text coming through.
I'll bet the room probably runs about that same price too, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, the room we've been staying the last 4 or 5 years at the West Baden. I think they're 210, 220, something like that.
That's such a beautiful place. Though.
It really
just
is.
Gorgeous. Can't describe it.
And the fact that they were able to salvage it and save it. Because we went there, I'm going to say 20 years ago, before it was, it was awful.
Pretty derelict.
It was awful. And they had a group of volunteers, and they would give little tours.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't even hardly safe to take the tour, you know. And, you know, we made a little donation. You know, they was always asking for money. And we got on their mailing list somehow. So, yeah, for sure.
Well, that's such a fascinating and really historic place.
Yes. I love to. Every time I go down, I do the very same thing. I'll spend an hour and a half walking around the perimeter looking at every photo and old picture. Because everyone's history of the entire building and the area, that's pretty neat.
And some of those earlier before and after pictures.
Yes.
Here's the before, and you can see what it is now.
Yeah.
Really, they did a marvelous job.
Yeah.
Well, afterwards, I assume you settled back in Marshall then after?
Well, we settled in the West Union area.
Okay.
We built a new home there. And gosh, started our family. Well, actually, we started our family before we built the new home. That's why we needed a new home. Because when we were first married, we lived in a 12 by 50 mobile home. And we outgrew that. When the second little girl came along, we had to do something different. So and we built a new home down there. And of all things, I kept putting my application in at different places, looking for a real job, because farming was not that great at that time. And just before I got hired at Marathon Oil, we sold that house and moved to Marshall. We wanted to build another house. And we rented a little house over on, up by the swimming pool. We rented a small house there for a year and a half or 2 years. And at that time we was building a new house out at Gulf Lakes. So somewhere along the line there we would remodel a house and sell it, and build a house and live in it a year and sell it. And then we finally got tired of that. And I was working for Marathon Oil. I worked there 4 years.
Okay. With Marathon, were you in mechanical repair? What type of work were you doing there?
Basically, I went there, they put me digging a ditch. Yes, sir.
Thought you were back in the military, didn't you?
Yeah. But that just happened to be what the crew was doing that day, putting in a small water line, and which I didn't really care. I grew up, I understood what hard work was, and you just do it, you know. But yeah, my entire career was in the maintenance department, and if it broke, there was a crew of us that we just went and fixed it, and we got pretty good at it. So we kind of had an edge on some of the other guys, because it was very obvious. There were 6 of us, and we enjoyed what we did. It didn't matter how dirty it was or how late at night it was. It was a challenge to get it fixed and get it running again. And that's what Marathon likes. They don't like to have equipment sitting idle, you know. So, but yeah,
they don't like people sitting idle either.
Right. So actually, I was in what you call hands-on maintenance for about 11 or 12 years. And then the last 10 years, they kind of prepped me into, I guess you'd say, management, to foreman, and then planner, and then turnaround planner, and then turnaround scheduler. And so it was pretty much an office job, but I was very lucky because I knew the plant well enough. It made my job easy.
Were you always in Robinson, or did you have to go out to some of the other
Well, we
locations?
did go. There were 3 of us. We'd go to other plants
Okay.
when they had turnarounds, and we'd actually go in before the turnaround and basically assess, evaluate. Are you ready? You know, what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with that?
If there was like a major oil leak or something, did you get pushed out to do any of
Once
that
in a
stuff?
while, yeah. Once in a while, if a refinery, for instance, had a fire and damaged a lot of equipment,
Okay.
their guys, their in-plant people, were pretty much trying to get things to a point you could work on them. Because when you have a fire in a refinery, you've got mess. I mean, even if no one gets injured, it's just a huge mess. Things melt down. Demolition to get things torn out is a big deal. You know, it's
Just almost inconceivable the risk and damage and all that the fire with
it
that
is.
kind of feeding would do.
right. Yeah, of course, obviously, there's been some horrible accidents. We were very fortunate, at least during my career. We had a few smaller injuries at Robinson, but different other refineries. Well, Texas City, Garyville, Louisiana. Some of those had loss of life, and that's never acceptable. You know, you got to find out why. So that's where we would end up trying to. We kind of came in as another set of eyes. We could, in a situation like that, the plant people there, they're just beside themselves. I mean, they may have lost a friend, or a friend's injured, or their unit that they've walked on every day for 10 years is now a pile of rubble. So somebody has to kind of give them a 5,000-foot view. Here, you know, guys, let's get this going. Let's get this cleaned up.
In the time you were with them, did you see the way things were done change a lot?
Oh, yeah.
Automation?
Now, it wasn't so
equipment
much
used
automation as it was time management. I mean, we became a lot more, how do I want to say, specialized.
No.
Even though we were under the umbrella of a general labor group, we became more specialized. Like, one of my specialties was reactors. My good friend from Sullivan, Indiana, he was pumping piping. So, like I say, there were 6 of us, and we kind of set up we didn't even realize we were doing it, but we kind of had a nucleus of guys that knew what had to happen and when it needed to happen.
Well, it seemed like in this period of time, so much changed with the use of computers and stuff too. Did that influence your type of work?
Yes. I could barely spell computer when I had to start using one. But I'd been there long enough that I knew I couldn't retire. I still had another 10 years to go or so. Well, the older guys that were set in their ways, they wouldn't even attempt. They in the maintenance department, our work orders now had to be printed off. You had to respond that you got it. Yes. And then at the end of the day, if you got your job done, you had to go in and type in, put in the system what you did, how long it took, who helped you, how much material, all these things, and those guys wouldn't do it. So they leaned on us younger guys, and we did it for them, But it was good training for me, So
Get the job done regardless of who does it.
yeah. I forget, they had a slogan, the job is not done until the computer's on, or something like that. I don't know. Those old guys, they just weren't going to change.
Do you use a computer
Sure.
today, to this day?
Yeah, here we are today now. We have 2 laptops, an iPad,
Oh, gee.
and 2 smartphones. So I don't know what we would do without technology today. But
I've got a dumb phone.
it was a struggle for a while. But I guess it wasn't that I was so brilliant, because I wasn't, but I could see that's where everything was headed.
Just the way that things
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, just good, bad, or indifferent, that's where we were going to go. And it's got its drawbacks for sure.
And I know you've been retired now a little while, but do you ever think, I wonder what would happen if I went back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Actually, I've been contacted a couple times. In fact, just had a phone call 2 days ago. One of the old units that I was very familiar with. It's in turnaround right now. And want to know if I'd be interested in just come and help a little bit. And which I would in a heartbeat this year, because things are a little calmer and the weather's nice now. But we have a trip planned, so I told them that probably just turn them down this time, But yeah, I'd enjoy going back for a short time.
Well, you've been enjoying your retirement, obviously.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's a thing you used to be involved in a little bit called city government.
Yeah. Yes. Spent 8 years on the city council. Ken Smith was mayor. We had a great council. Everyone got along well. Got a few things done to benefit the community. I enjoyed that time.
Was there anything really significant you say, wow, it might not have happened if it hadn't have been for a city decision?
Well, there's a couple things maybe. I don't know that it was such a wow factor, but it, for instance, we already had obviously a Walmart, and they were having meetings with the city. The mayor started with them to put in what they classify as, I think, a super Walmart. It's just larger than the old one. So yeah, we were able to. They wanted some things that we could offer, and it's beneficial to the city and Walmart too. So yeah, that wasn't a hard decision to make. I mean, really, we always were looking for a couple small businesses to come to Marshall. Someone that employed 50 or 75 people. You're never going to get the big 500 employee car plant or anything like that in Marshall. But if you can focus on 2 or 3 smaller little businesses. And
those smaller ones are more beneficial in case there's an uprising or a problem. A big company of 500 people leaves, you got a major problem.
That's right. And ironically, you're just seeing that today with Mitsubishi plant up
Peoria?
Champaign, Peoria, somewhere up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've reneged on all their tax abatement money and one thing and another. They just turned the lights off, I guess.
I'm not sure what brought that all about either, but
I suppose it was market. I mean, that's about the only thing it could be. I guess. Of course, you never know when you get into that caliber of business,
Usually in the city government there are various committees and all. You served on several committees, I'm sure, in those 8 years too, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Probably the one I enjoyed. Well, actually, they were all. I'll ignore that, but all the committees were interesting. Street and alley, parks, chairman of the labor committee. So yeah, it was very interesting. You could see all the various things that were taking place in the city by being on those committees,
And Marshall is really what I would say a big business.
Oh, it is.
I mean, the size of the budget and the decisions that need to be made, they're not minor things to take care of.
Right. No, not at all. I mean, well, you've sat in on enough city council meetings. I mean, when the bills come in and to be paid, I mean, you're talking, $1,000,000.
Big bucks.
That's not uncommon to have $1,000,000 worth of bills. But by having your own utilities, you're buying electricity, you're buying gas, all those things. You're delivering water and sewer, and it's big business.
Was it a big decision for you not to run again?
No. No, we can just say a short statement about that. There was one person that was elected to the council, and he was just not a happy person, and he caused so much grief for everyone. And I'll just let it go at that.
And bottom line, you're glad not to be apparently involved in the city government anymore.
Right.
Was there a person somewhere along that really was a major influence to you?
You mean with city politics?
No, with just you in general,
in
and
general?
your business and your lifetime and all that. You'd say, boy, that person really spoke to me, and I maybe even adjusted my philosophy based on them.
Well, you can appreciate this. Next to my dad, obviously, but I always consider him a great friend, and I think he treated me just like a son if he would have had a son, and that was Lyle Wilkins at the Martinsville State Bank.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a good-hearted, down-to-earth farmer that ended up being, bank president, I suppose, or something like that. We'd have good discussions about livestock and equipment and this and that and the other. And so, yeah, I'd say he probably had a good part of that.
Have you ever thought about, oh gosh, if I could just go back to military, back to farming, would there be any place you'd rather like to go back to?
Oh gosh. I don't think so. I've enjoyed everything I've done. I've enjoyed every career type path that I've been on. But to look back and say, oh gosh, I wish I'd have stayed and done this or done that. No.
Those good old days are not necessarily all that gold.
Well, they're not that bad at all, but I mean, the old cliche, been there, done that. I'd try something new today if it popped up, So my wife thinks I've lost my mind, but
Surely.
Because it seems like I'm always reading about one thing or another. Think, boy, you know what? That'd be a pretty good deal.
Are there particular things you're enjoying in retirement now that,
Oh, yes.
that you're doing?
Yeah.
That you didn't have an opportunity to do before?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, raising grandkids. I mean, I'm raising my grandkids. They're taking the place of my children. Because when my daughters were young, I was working all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, a lot of things. Oh, I got to do their school functions and this and that. And but there's still, when the husband works at one job, one big job, and then maybe a couple other side jobs, doesn't leave a lot of time for family, So that's one thing I would have, if I went back, I would have definitely changed that a little bit. But thank goodness I got wonderful grandkids, and I love being with them every minute.
And they live?
My oldest daughter has 2 sons, and her husband Troy live here in town in Marshall. And those 2 boys, one is a freshman this year and one is a junior. So they've just shot up.
Oh my, yeah.
I missed being able to do a lot of things with them. The going fishing or working on an old truck or just silly
They
things.
grew up
like
so
that.
fast.
Yeah, they do. Then my youngest daughter, she has a set of twins and then a little 2-year-old. And the fact that she teaches school here in town and we're here, we became a built-in babysitter. So we've really enjoyed that. Elaine and I, we keep them a lot and love every minute of it, And the other grandparents do as well. We switch back and forth. If we have an appointment or a meeting or something, the other one will pick up the slack, and vice versa. So yeah, it works out nice.
You've worked with a lot of mechanical things and all, and just around we've got so many modern convenience and all. Is there something you'd say, Jim, that, boy, I just couldn't live without that?
Well, there's a lot of things I'd certainly hate to live without. But at the end of the day, you don't need all this stuff. You really don't. It's very nice, the nice home, the air conditioning, and and you flip a switch and the lights come on and the coffee pot takes off, But I just the convenience of a nice home. I suppose that's something.
And everything depends on electricity, it seems like anymore.
Yes.
In the stores, if the electricity goes off, things just come to us.
You can't even pay your bill.
May not even be able to get in the door with electric covers.
Yeah, I wonder if we've not kind of outdone ourselves a little bit, But during this discussion, and there's a little age difference between you and I, but look at the changes that we have seen. I mean, seriously.
And still changing, I think. It's still
every
going.
Every day, yes.
It's almost a little on the scary side.
But I tell my daughters, they get me to telling old stories and then they make fun of me. But my dad would put me up on a high chair and I'd crank the phone to call my grandma. And my grandsons they don't even, you did what now?
And how did you live without that box that has a screen and a picture in the front?
Yeah, well, we lived quite well. We played till dark, we wore ourselves out, took a bath and went to bed and got up and did it again the next day. Yeah, probably the TV, although I'd hate to be without it, but it certainly has affected the family element, really. It really has.
And the car you've got in the garage is probably a little different than that 47 Ford you had.
A little bit different, yes. Yeah. It's got everything in the world on it. I mean, they convince you need all that stuff, And
as long as it all works, you're doing fine.
Right.
Jim, if you were sent in another country, or maybe even in Florida, and someone said, "Where do you live?" You said a little town, Marshall, in Illinois. And they'd say, where on earth is that? What's that about? What would you tell them about Marshall and why that might be a fun place to visit?
Oh, lots of reasons. It's just Marshall, Illinois is just a wonderful, close-knit, small community in the middle of the Midwest. I mean, it's in the middle of agriculture, and you're 2.5 hours from heavy industry in Chicago, or an hour from Indianapolis. Major interstate, you're 47 miles to 2 more interstates. It's a great place. But the small town element's what I like. Everyone almost knows everyone. Which goes back to your small farming community too. You knew every neighbor within 7 or 8 miles of you,
And they knew you.
Yes, and what you should be doing or should not be doing. That's a fact.
That's right. Well, Jim, it's been a delight visiting with you. And it's been fun reminiscing about some of our community and some of the things in the past. I really appreciate you taking the time out this evening to visit with us and to put your thoughts and your story on recorder.
Well,
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it. I thought, what on earth am I going to talk about? And here all of a sudden I've talked nonstop for, an hour probably? Or more?